Fractal Design Torrent launched 2 glorious reviews across the entire tech press. My review came in at 8 out of 10. I liked it, but I had 1 or 2 issues. Pretty much everybody else adored the thing. Since then we've had a little bit of bad news from Fractal, which is that the fan hub, which is one of the great many features, has been affected by a product recall. This is the hub here. It's a low profile fan hub, PWM, very nice piece of kit that sits pretty much out of sight. Except unfortunately there is the risk of a short between the power and ground. Fractal's got busy issuing statements on Twitter and also some notices on their website telling us about the problem and saying that affected parties will have an updated part available just as soon as possible. However, fair play to Fractal, there's a problem, they're addressing it. So this is the hub, let's take it out. 1 screw, 2 screws, 3 screws, and away. And then we trace back these wires. There's the power, and there is the PWM. Now if I stop the video at this point, it's terribly short and of course entirely inconclusive. So how's about we take the opportunity to address a couple of the questions I raised in my review. Here's the thing, in our little tech community, there are only so many voices worth listening to.
How dare you?
Not her.
Lack of moral principle.
Not him.
I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time.
Not her.
Here we are.
Oh yes, him. Steve from Gamers Nexus adored the Torrent, as indeed did his entire team. I, as I mentioned, had 1 or 2 questions. So let's dig into those. My review of the Fractal Design Torrent differed from most of the others out there in 2 important respects. One is I went custom loop. That's the big difference. Many people, including Gamers Nexus, use an air cooler. Others use an all-in-one 240, maybe a 360. The way I see it is, why should I go head to head with those reviews? Why not cater to the niche audience, the enthusiast audience? This case and many other cases claim to support custom loop hardware. Let's give it a try. So while the review is of interest to many people, it's only of burning passionate interest to a handful of you. I do understand that, but it seems like a legitimate choice on my part. It was clear from the comments below the video that at least some of our audience felt a decent air cooler was the way to go in a case with good airflow. To my mind, that's slightly warped thinking. After all, liquid cooling also requires good airflow. But hey ho, we're going to have a second bite at the cherry with the Torrent, this time using a Noctua D15. The other thing is cable management. I made very little effort to pull the cables back up into the power supply compartment at the top of the case. So I'm going to have a bit of a change there. Obviously we've lost the PWM hub, so there's a small change involved there. I'm not going to use the accessory RGB fans at the front. I'll go with the stock fans, so there's slightly less cabling involved there. And I'm going to use Fractal's own power supply, and I'm going to make an effort to pull the cables up in the top. There's also the question of the securing screws for the 2 side panels. As I dig in further, I'll address that point as well. It's a relatively small point, but it is worth just pointing out the precise details of how the side panels can be secured. I'm using the same motherboard, processor, memory and SSD as before. Asus TUF Gaming X570 Plus, G-Skill Trident Z Neo, Sabrent Rocket 4.0, Ryzen 9 3900X. On the back, you can see I've got some cables to connect the fan, so I've got a 3-way splitter for the 3 front fans going to 1 header on the motherboard, and the 2 front fans are connected to a 2-way splitter, so 5 fans to 2 headers. And there they are at the bottom, which means that I'm all set to connect my Noctua D15 to the CPU fan headers up top. So that's the guts of the hardware. Next up, it's the power supply. Fractal Iron Plus 2 Platinum 860 watts. 860 watts, unusual. Fully modular. So let's figure out which cables we're going to need. Mainboard power. One EPS. Second EPS. Graphics. Second graphics. No SATA, no Molex, we ain't got no fan hub, haven't got any peripherals. There we go. Power supply installed. As you can see, I've pulled a tiny amount of cabling into the power supply housing, so I've changed the power supply, but the cabling setup here is pretty much as before. Around the back, it's looking considerably more tidy, partly because these cables are very slightly more flexible than the others, but mainly I've got less clutter. I haven't got the liquid cooling hardware, I haven't got RGB cables, there's just less. To reiterate a point from my original review, I have no drives installed. I could potentially have 2 hard drives and up to 4 SSDs, therefore you've got data cables and power cables to contend with. It is, as I said in that review, doable. Here I can see how it might work. Next step is the Noctua D15 installation. And in with the cooler. It's a big cooler, but that's a lot of space. Time to install the 2 fans. The final piece of the puzzle is the graphics card. Last time I used an RTX 3080 with liquid cooling. This time my Sapphire RX 6800 XT, which has a similar power draw to the 3080 and is going to tell us all we need to know about the cooling of this PC. Look at all that space. Airflow galore. Power cables over the back of the graphics card to make sure they're nowhere near the fans. Cables neat and tidy on the inside. And look, when the case is half empty, there's plenty of space this side too. And yes, there are some cables pulled back into the power supply compartment, but it's only a detail. It's not fundamental to the build. And the big question is how easily the right hand panel goes on. Look at that, no drama at all. And the glass. Before I proceed, I mentioned at the start of the video these side panels can be retained by a screw. Same sort of screw you use to install the motherboard. So if we take off the glass panel, you'll see here we have that lug. Remove the top panel. And there we have a hole. If I put this panel in place, I can drop a screw in it here and secure the glass panel for transportation. Okay, and that is exactly as per Fractal's user guide. It is meant to be the case for the other panel. small screw, slightly fiddly, much smaller than a thumb screw. There we go. However, this panel does not have the same hole in the top of the panel. Instead, it has a hole on that face there. Which is there. So if I want to retain this panel for transportation, or if I've got a huge amount of cables because I've got a complicated build, I have to install the screw there. And that of course is in line with all the cables. So I could get a tiny screwdriver, put the screw in, run it home, and it would doubtless help to retain the panel if it's got a bulge of cables pushing against it. Theoretically. In practice, it's not really a starter. If it had the same lug on this panel as on this, and I could put a screw in through the hole in the frame that is in place for that exact purpose, it would be quite straightforward. And it's a small screw. If you've got a load against the panel, I don't think it's a very good idea anyway. Back on with this panel, and now let's get the system running. Compared to a liquid-cooled PC, turning it on, it's not very exciting, not a lot happens. But the important thing is, we have life. Power draw for this system compared to the custom loop system with the RTX 3080 is up by 30 watts, so it's now 530 watts at the wall socket versus 500 watts for the other system. And of course the other system has a pump in it, in addition to the changing graphics. But broadly speaking, we are comparing apples with apples. It has to be said that taking a 250 odd watt GPU out of the cooling loop helps the CPU. So my Ryzen 9 3900X with the mighty Noctua D15 is now running closer to 70 Celsius than previously 80 Celsius. However, the air-cooled graphics are running considerably hotter than the custom loop RTX 3080. Very much a case of swings and roundabouts. It's also really worth pointing out that with the fans in auto mode, which are really quite quiet, versus fans at full speed, which get rather more noisy, the difference in temperatures is next to nothing, and that tells me this case does indeed flow air properly, and you don't need to ramp up your fan speed to get decent airflow to keep everything happy inside. But we knew that. The point is, I initially said, I think exactly that actually, this case works well. So let's compare this second look to my original review. My views have not changed one scrap. Except I'm happy I put a custom loop in it first time round, because this case looks ridiculous to my mind, even with this huge air cooler and this huge graphics card. Look at all the space. I mean, it works well, but why do you need such a large case for this hardware? You just don't. If you're putting extra hardware in this case, it's going to be storage. That goes round the back. This side won't change one bit. You're not going to put anything else in this side of the case that is going to use that space. So custom loop hardware on GPU is a win. As I said previously, Noctua D15 on Ryzen 9 is absolutely blooming amazing, but I think we knew that already. Cable management, which was one of the big thorny issues previously. With the change in hardware, and I've detailed them all already, you've seen the result, it's clearly much better. No argument there. But I'm sticking to my guns. Fractal does not provide enough space behind the right hand side panel. Another 5 to 10 mil would help hugely. The business about the fan hub and the recall is obviously very unfortunate, but they're handling that, so we're not going to go there. The other thing is, I think this system looks really boring compared to the custom loop, purely on aesthetic grounds. Doesn't change my views on the case one little bit. I'm just saying, if you're going down the Fractal design Torrent route, I think you should seriously consider proper liquid cooling hardware. And that's it. My second look is done. Hope you enjoyed it.